Good morning, folks. Um, you recall that this past weekend we had a wonderful gospel story. It was the story of the Samaritan woman who was a very sort of alienated person, ultimately through the power of Jesus coming to a fullness of belief, not just in him, but also she encouraged her townspeople to do exactly the same. This weekend, we also have another very masterful Chanda's story, and it's about a blind man who not just did he receive his sight, but also he received the gift of faith. He encountered Jesus, and Jesus told him to made a paste out of mud and spit on the mud, and he rubbed it to the guy's eyes, and he said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam." So he went and he washed, and all of a sudden, for the first time in his life, he was able to see. And then after he was able to see, then he encountered several different groups, and one after another. They were like little vignettes in a sense, and one after another he had an interchange with them. The first one is the neighbours. The neighbours weren't really sure. Could this possibly be the same person that used to sit on the side of the road and beg? And they were confused about this anyhow, and they couldn't figure out if it was indeed how he could see. And so they brought him to the Pharisees, and the same thing with the Pharisees. There was a certain amount of confusion there also, and when they realised that his eyes were opened, and that it happened on a Sabbath. Then they said, "There's no way this could happen. That God would open his eyes on the Sabbath." And so some says, this couldn't happen, and so they had a confusion among themselves. And so they said the best thing to do, in terms of whether or not this is the guy who was a blind and now he can see. The best thing we can do is take him to his parents. So they went to the parents, and the parents says, "Yeah, this was our son, and we know that we know him, obviously know him well, and we know that he was blind, and now we can see." And so the Pharisee says, "Well, how did that happen?" And they said. We have no idea how it happened. And the reason why they said that was because of the fact that they were afraid of the Jewish people. They were afraid that if they acknowledged that his cure was as a result of his being a miracle from Jesus Christ, then they felt that they would be thrown out of the synagogue. So this says he's old enough. Let him speak for himself. So again, they asked him, if he was indeed cured by Jesus, and he said, and he said that he was, and so then they felt that the best thing to do was to go back to the Pharisees. So they went back to the Pharisees a second time, and the Pharisees said, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind, and now that I see." And they said to him, "What did he do to you?" The guy says, "You opened my eyes." And this is, tell us the whole story. And he said to them, "I've already told you the story, and you didn't believe." He says, "Do you want me to tell it a second time?" And so they got annoyed at him, and they said that this man ultimately, there's no way that God could open his eyes, and that actually that he is indeed steeped in sin. And so what they did was they ended up throwing him out of the synagogue, and so there he was on the side of the street, and he encountered Jesus, and Jesus says to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he says, "Who is he that I may believe?" And Jesus says, I am the Son of Man, obviously, and he says, "I do believe." He says, "Help my unbelief." So he moved from blindness to being able to not just to see, but to be able to see the deeper meaning of things, meaning to be able to see the fact that he was he was indeed not just forgiven and healed, but he was now a son of God in the very fullest sense of the word. So there I've given you a sort of a summary statement of a more involved story. So I really encourage you to read it for yourselves, and you can sort it out, because as you move from one scene to the other, it's easy to get a little bit confused until you actually see it in print. But overall, it is a great story of God's healing love and mercy. And there's a little statement at the end of it, I think it's very powerful. It says the following. It says, Jesus says, "I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who see might become blind." So there's a play there upon light, obviously light and darkness. And what has happened is during the course of the story, what happened is the blind man came to the fullness of light and life. And at the same time as he moved into the fullness of light, the Pharisees went in the opposite direction. For individuals who supposedly believed fully in God their Creator and God their Lord, all of a sudden they sort of found themselves, they were in darkness. They could never see God's action being fulfilled in this individual's life. So a good story, and I hope that you read it and enjoy it. Thank you.